Hamza.
You're Frank, right? Yeah. So my name is Mansur. Probably met you online. Yeah. So are you going to be more reasonable today in Speaker's Corner compared to what we've seen in your online presence? Or
I am reasonableness itself. I'll tell you the same story I came to tell all the others.
But before you tell me the stories, let me give you a syllogism about why.
Syllogism. That's exactly what this is about.
Yeah.
It's a syllogism.
Let me tell you before you interrupt, right? The reason why Christianity, the version that you hold, is not true, I'll give you in 3 simple steps. God necessarily is self-sufficient and independent. That's premise 1. Jesus necessarily is not self-sufficient and independent. My conclusion from premise 1 and 2, Jesus is not God. Do you have anything against this argument?
But hang on, when you're talking about Jesus the man on earth, he's come as a man.
How many person is Jesus?
Sorry?
How many person is Jesus? How many person?
Well, as a man, he's a
How many person is he? Is he 1 person or 2 person?
He's one.
Right. So Jesus, the 1 person, is not necessarily self-sufficient and independent, but God is necessarily self-sufficient and independent. Because Jesus is not God.
But does the Bible ever say that Jesus is all of God?
Now, I'm telling you, Jesus is not God. So do you accept that Jesus is not God?
No, I don't.
So now tell me, what is invalid in my premises, in my argument? Do you disagree that God is necessarily self-sufficient and independent?
But hang on, you're trying to use these terms, like what does self-sufficient and independent...
If you don't know, ask me, I'll tell you.
You're using stuff about God.
Are you saying you don't know what self-sufficient means? Are you saying you don't know what independent means?
You're trying to apply these things. You're trying to apply these things.
If you don't know the meanings of these terms,
you're trying to put God in a box.
I'm not.
No,
I'm actually trying to put God as He is.
So let's open up the box.
So let me explain. Do you accept God is not dependent on anything or anyone? Right?
Yes.
That means He's independent.
Yes.
Do you also accept that God is self-sufficient? He doesn't need anyone to be for Him to be brought into existence.
Yes.
And I'm saying God has to be necessarily. Do you accept that?
That He has to be necessary.
It's not by choice that He's independent. He's necessarily independent and self-sufficient.
Well, He is.
Is He by choice or by necessity?
But hang on. Suddenly you're saying that you're saying there's rules.
You disagree. No, you disagree with the premises.
No, but
about
you're
God.
applying rules over God.
Do you know God?
You're applying rules to God.
No, about God. So do you say God is someone who will cease to exist?
Hold on.
Brother.
Do you think, right, that God could create a stone?
Brother, but that's not this. No. Don't confuse.
Do you believe
Don't
that?
confuse this, brother. Excuse me. Excuse me. You're confusing the issue.
Yeah, but if you say no, then you're applying.
No. You're confusing the issue. Let's make it simple for Frank.
Yeah.
Do you accept there are certain things which are true for only God?
Of course.
Right. Is God necessarily self-sufficient and independent?
I don't like that necessarily.
So that means, is He by choice then?
You're trying to.
Let me help you out then. Is God independent by choice?
We know God.
No. I'm not going to move anywhere else, Frank. This is not the online Zoom sessions. This is Speaker's Corner. So I'm going to ask you this question. If you're open for it, we have a discussion. Otherwise, ma'as-salama. So because you want to have a discussion...
When you say necessarily, you're trying to make your logic apply rules to God.
I will explain.
And I'm saying I'm not going to do that.
No, I will explain. Either God is by His own choice independent, or He could choose otherwise not to be independent. Are you saying God can exercise His choice, saying, you know what, I can be dependent or I can be independent? Is the choice of God appropriate here, relevant here, applicable here?
Well, in Jesus, yes.
No, I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about God.
Because
any being that is going to be at least called worthy of being God, this God, is He independent by necessarily, or by choice?
God is independent, and in Jesus,
excuse me, stop. This reality of ours, we are all dependent. We are all contingent. The only explanation of our existence can be necessarily dependent on something that is independent by necessity.
the way,
By necessity. Do you agree or disagree?
Is this Muslim teaching that's in the Quran, or is this is philosophy?
Common sense, Frank.
It's not
If you don't have common sense,
This is
I
not-
cannot give it to you. Common sense is something you don't.
is
Either
not-
you have it, you don't. So let me tell you.
This is-
either you have Frank. Wait, stop.
This is not common sense.
Frank,
you're
Frank,
talking philosophy.
Frank,
you're applying stuff to God.
Frank,
and you
listen.
say common sense.
Frank. Are you saying?
And it's not in the. This
Frank,
is teaching in the Quran.
Frank, listen. Are you suggesting?
Mansur, I can shout back at you. Look,
Listen,
you're telling me stuff
Okay.
that's not in the Quran.
We'll depart because
Okay, yep.
I don't think you're capable enough to have a discussion meaningfully.
I think you're telling me.
No, I am.
You're using philosophy.
I'm making
to
this
back up
assertion that either yourself, you are unwilling to have a discussion based on common sense because you know it's a matter of common sense, because you are so afraid. Let me finish my point, Frank. Let me finish my point.
Common sense.
Frank, let me finish my point. Or there's something else going on. Look, if you truly, genuinely want to have a meaningful discussion, what I am asking for is not rocket science. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that if we exist here, all dependent, the only reasonable explanation can be that we have to depend on something that is independent. Because if we depend on something dependent, the question starts again. What does a dependent thing depends on? Eventually, it has to depend on something that is independent. So it is not rocket science or philosophy.
So far, this is Christian theology. So far, this is Christian theology.
Wait, Frank. So we have to accept by reason, intellectual discussion that we're having, but God has to be necessarily independent and self-sufficient. You are disagreeing with that premise because you know I've already made my argument.
I'm not.
Let me finish. I've made my argument in 3 steps. Jesus necessarily is not self-sufficient. You know that. He's not. That is why any Christian that comes here with sense and reason will have to admit Jesus is not God. So I'm going to ask you again. Do you disagree that God is necessarily self-sufficient and independent?
I agree with that.
You agree. Good.
But the Quran doesn't teach it.
Hang on.
The Quran does not teach that.
Good. So you agree with the first premise. My second premise. Jesus is necessarily not self-sufficient and independent. Do you agree or disagree?
Jesus, the man that came to earth.
Jesus the person. Jesus the person in his eternal existence.
In all
Is
his
he
guises.
in his all of his manifestations? Is he necessarily independent or dependent? Self-sufficient or not self-sufficient? I say he is not independent. He's not self-sufficient by necessarily. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't disagree with that at all. I don't agree with that at all.
Why?
Because I think you have no idea what Jesus is before he came on earth.
So now you're saying
you've seen
okay.
Jesus on earth.
So let's now talk about it. So
know.
Jesus, before the earth was created, he is independent and self-sufficient. That means he doesn't need the Father or the Son even to be in existence for Jesus to be there.
He's part of the one existence.
Hear me out. Jesus, if he's ever going to be labeled as independent and self-sufficient, it follows that he doesn't need even the existence of the Father or the Holy Spirit for his own existence. Is that right?
No, because then you're teaching polytheism.
Hang on.
You're teaching polytheism.
Frank, are you telling?
No, he's getting it.
Frank, are you now telling me Jesus is dependent on the Father for his existence?
They are one being.
No. Is he dependent on the Father or is he independent of the Father?
Yeah, they're one being, and you have no idea.
My question to you, Frank, without waffling, this is Speaker's Corner, not online Zoom session. The word I'm using to you specifically is dependent or independent. If you don't know what the meaning is, I can show you the dictionary meaning. But I do know you know what it means. Is Jesus dependent on the Father or is he independent on the Father?
Jesus is the man on earth. You cannot.
Is he dependent on the Father or is he independent on the Father before he created the whole universe, according to you? So I am not going to restrict Jesus as a man, Jesus as the Logos, which existed, according to you, before the foundation of this world. So at that point, is Jesus dependent on the Father or is he independent? There is no way out, Frank. You say he's dependent or you say he's independent?
Well, I can say he's not independent.
So he's dependent.
They're one being.
So because he's not independent, so my premise is true.
Yeah.
Then he's not God. Well done. You just proven my point.
No, we haven't finished yet.
We have.
haven't finished.
What is there to discuss? If Jesus is not necessarily self-sufficient and independent, he cannot be God, because God is necessarily self-sufficient and independent.
The foundation is gone.
Is the left hemisphere of my brain dependent on me?
Listen, Jesus is not self-sufficient and independent. God is. Therefore, Jesus is not God. Is that rocket science to understand that?
Is the left
I'm not going to talk about your left hemisphere or right hemisphere. I have laid down my premises for my argument. If you don't know about this argument before, you learned it in Speaker's Corner today. Now, try.
Mansur is preaching to himself. He thinks he's got a very good point here, but he's not answering the question.
Neither are you.
Is my left hemisphere?
Jesus is not God because he's not self-sufficient. So you do accept that?
Is the left hemisphere of my brain dependent on me?
Who's you? Who's you?
Huh?
Who's you?
What do you mean, who am I?
Yeah, when you say dependent on you, who's you?
Well, I'm just asking you, yes or no?
No, who's you?
Me.
Me who?
You can see me.
No, me who? Me the man, me the spirit, me the body?
Let me make it easier. Is the left hemisphere of your brain dependent on you?
Hold on.
Dependent for what?
Wait, just a sec. The left hemisphere of your brain.
Yeah.
Did you create it?
No. Well, no.
Sorry, guys. Then the analogy doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah?
My brain.
Did God create Jesus? No, they're one.
Did he create Jesus?
Huh?
Did he create Jesus?
They're one.
They're one. Did God cause Jesus into existence?
No, they're one. But
Did he cause him into existence?
when he comes to the earth,
My question is not about is he one or two. It's a different question, Frank.
when he's on earth,
If you don't understand English, let me tell you what a different question is. Is Jesus caused by the Father into existence?
no, because he's coexisting with him. He's one.
Is he caused? Does Jesus proceed eternally from the Father?
Does the left hemisphere of my brain
Okay,
proceed?
Frank, well done to you. Speaker's Corner, you learned the lesson very harshly that yes, we don't waste our time with people who waste our time. So you are wasting my time. Frank, see you later. You're not worth my time speaking.
All right.
Seriously.
Frank, I think it's done.
Assalamu
No.
After all that, he's still got homework.
Can you take all these mics because give it to him? This is give that to him.